So Fobazi Ettarh is a student success librarian at California State Dominguez Hills. She received her master's in library science from Rutgers University. A school librarian by training, she specializes in information literacy instruction, K through 12 pedagogy, and critical digital scholarship, and has published and presented on these topics nationally. She is the author of the article Making a New Table, Intersectional Librarianship, which was published in the Library with Lead Pipe. She recently contributed a chapter titled Deconstructing Gender and Financial Literacy in the Critical Pedagogy for Library Instruction Handbooks, and is a 2017 ALA Emerging Leader. So welcome, Fobazi.
All right, good morning, everyone. I've only been at Cal State Dominguez Hills for maybe 2 months now, and so I'm still not used to the traffic coming from Long Beach. Man, I miss the East Coast. In any case, thank you all for being here. So what you need to know for this presentation, and hopefully for this conference in general, this is not a safe space for white people. To the white people in the room, thank you for coming. It shows a willingness to learn, and I appreciate it. However, the fight for equality and equity is hard. It's sticky, it's uncomfortable, and therefore it might not feel like a safe space. But I want you to lean into that discomfort. Don't stop at defensiveness. Once you get past that, really that's when the work begins. Second thing is, this presentation will have uncivil and unprofessional language. Oops, sorry. And the reason for that is often we use professionalism, we use civility as ways to reinforce and uphold white supremacy. Racism is not civil. White supremacy isn't civil. And I will be damned if I talk about this in an emotional way and have it be seen as therefore less committed or less rational. It's a lot easier to be rational when it's a thought experiment and not an actual impact. Notice, right, I've been naming names such as it were, right? White supremacy, racism, decolonialization. Well, these terms like diversity, terms like equity, terms like inclusion, they're sort of big, vague terms that are easily misconstrued, easily used in ways that aren't meant by the people who actually created the term. Even things like intersectionality, a buzzword, quote unquote, that is currently being used a lot in the discourse for radical discourse, is used in ways that often make those in power feel good because they use it as a, well, everyone has some sort of marginalization and therefore it's fine. No, we're talking about anti-racism work. We're talking about radical discourse, and therefore I'm not going to hide behind these names, these big concepts that can be used in all of these different ways. Finally, feelings are great, but actions are better, right? As I said before, you might feel uncomfortable, you might feel defensive, you might feel anxious as we start to do this work. And you should definitely feel free to feel those feelings. They're valid. However, too often the discourse stops there. We are here to raise awareness, but let's be real. People of color and other people in marginalized groups have been raising awareness for decades. Whether or not people accept the awareness is one thing, right? So instead of just stopping at, well, now I'm aware of the problem, think about what can I do next? It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be flashy. In most cases, I would prefer your allyship to not be flashy, but just do the work. Start doing whatever it needs to do to get there. So on the left, we have some of the values that ALA and many librarians espouse as the core values of librarianship. As it's in our ALA Code of Ethics, it's in the professional literature, it's in the trade journals. right? We provide equitable access and service to all library users, unless, of course, those library users are undesirable. We strive to increase the diversity of resources and professionals as long as they conform to hegemonic values. And we champion truth and free speech until those truths become uncomfortable. So really, libraries and librarians uphold institutional oppression and white supremacy, and often have no interest in changing that. So if any of these statements made you uncomfortable, right, I know that even knowing it myself, it can be uncomfortable to say out loud in a group of people. And the reason for this is a concept that I have created and I'm expanding on, vocational awe, right? The idea that librarianship is a vocation rather than a profession. So let's get deeper into that. What does that mean? It means it's the idea that libraries as an institution and as a field is inherently good. And therefore, it assumes that some core aspects of the profession cannot be critiqued. It's beyond critique. And often it underpins many librarians' sense of identity and commitment to the profession. The closest concept is occupational mythology, or the set of ideas, values, statements that make up a more healthy job place, or in fact, a more glorious job place. It's seen in journalism in the idea that, you know, divorce is just part of the job because you're chasing the story, right? You'll do whatever it takes to get to the truth, no matter the cost. And in librarianship, as I'll talk more about, these ideals create an unhealthy work environment as well. So let's start at the macro level, right? Here is some of the professional rhetoric, right? We have the Libraries Transform campaign, where we're saying libraries transform because they inspire understanding and community healing, as well as outside of libraries, where we see, that picture did not show up, but where we see things like librarians are the generals against the war on ignorance, or beacons of democracy. And at first glance, these seem not only innocuous, but positive things. We do want to, you know, help our users with critical thinking. We do want to make sure that our patrons have access to information. But by using such savior type language, religious type language, we then have librarians, it starts to trickle down, who go into the field not as a profession, but because they feel called to do it. They were born to do this work, born to raise critical thinkers, right? Librarians have been the most central to democracy since Alexandria, right? All of these sort of statements breed this rhetoric that you're going in as sort of library saviordom, as it may be, right? And then at its most micro level, you then have librarians who see themselves as spiritual advisors of information. You see librarians who say that librarianship, being a librarian, literally defines them like a vocation. And using, again, all of these weird religious martyrdom rhetoric to describe the job that they do. And so at first glance, it might seem like, well, this isn't necessarily specific to women of color and marginalized librarians. And that's true. Vocational awe affects us all because it is used as a weapon, as a symptom of white supremacy and white supremacy culture. And therefore, it further marginalizes the marginalized because those in power can bring it up and bring it out at any given moment to be like, why aren't you as fit or committed or whatever it might be? So what do I mean when I say white supremacy culture? It's the ways that organizations and individuals normalize, enact and reinforce white supremacy. Jones and Akun describe some of these characteristics as defensiveness, the right to comfort, either or thinking, and worship of the written word. So now I'm going to move on to some case studies or examples of how vocational awe is used as a mechanism of white supremacy culture. So I know that some of you may already know about these situations, but I'm just going to give a brief overview of the situations. So in the first one, we have Leslie Williams of Evanston, Illinois. She spoke on her personal Facebook about how her library, Evanston Public Library, was not living up to the ideals of free and equal access for all. So if vocational awe is to be believed, this should be something that she's praised for. She's going above and beyond to make sure that her library and her institution is upholding the values that ALA and librarianship stands for, equitable access. However, that was not the case. What in fact happened is that she was taken to task for saying this stuff. So you can't have it both ways, right? It shows that vocational awe isn't actually what we're striving for, because instead she critiqued the library as an institution, and the libraries are good. And so therefore, by critiquing it, she must be unprofessional. She must be creating an unhealthy work environment. She must be talking about politics in a professional space. So is it politics when we're critiquing the library and ideals when we're not? How does that make sense? Right. Another way that vocational awe affects librarianship negatively is by work-life separation, or the lack thereof. So I know I am guilty of this, but raise your hand if you've ever heard and or said one or more of the following. I might as well live, sleep in my office because I'm here so often. I usually work through lunch, work late. I'm addicted to checking email. I check and answer email all the time. And I feel guilty whenever I take sick or vacation days. Right? So again, vocational awe, right? Sort of being so committed to the field, so whole self librarian, all it does is create an environment where taking sick time is seen as less committed. Going home at a normal time, right? Most of us either work 9 to 5 or whatever the flexible hours may be, right? Going home after the 8 hours is seen as not as passionate. And therefore, it makes those who actually physically cannot stay late or work through lunch because they are chronically ill or disabled or have children or have outside of work obligations, aren't as passionate or as committed to the profession. And those who do strive, go all the way, right? Spend 60 plus hours at work. All it does is lead to burnout faster. And then you have articles will say, well, maybe you just weren't passionate enough. And that isn't what we want to do as librarians. And yet another way that vocational awe, right, impacts librarians negatively and contributes to white supremacy culture is white saviordom or library saviordom, because often those are one and the same, right? And this acceptance of job creep, not only acceptance, but embracing job creep. Currently, right, we have librarians in Philadelphia who are starting to administer Narcan to overdosing patrons both in and surrounding the library. Librarians are becoming nurses, social workers, mental health professionals on top of their already packed schedules. And now I'm not saying that these services aren't great. Libraries most often are community centers, and so there is a case to be made that these services should be offered. However, what I am saying is that librarians themselves should not be offering these services. We should be reaching out to those within the community, organizations within the community that do this work and bringing them in, whether it's hiring actual social workers to be in the library or hiring medical professionals to be in the library. We should not be taking on all of this work because at the end of the day, it is not our mission to be a one-stop shop for all the failed social services in the community. We are not getting the resources and the help to do this work. Take the Philly librarian who, as the article says, literally has saved 6 lives. Where is her mental health care? Where is her trauma care? Because I know that if I saw someone literally dying in front of me and I had to administer medicine to them, that I would need some sort of care afterwards. Libraries don't have the model to give librarians and other staff this care. Not to mention that it also tends to reinforce, again, white supremacy. 10, 20 years ago, when we were talking about the war on drugs, we weren't administering Narcan, we weren't administering methadone. What we were doing was calling the police, was calling security, because those victims were undesirable. Now that the victims are desirable, we're talking about rehabilitation. We're talking about, oh, well, of course librarians have to help them. Why is it that depending on whose body is the victim, our mission changes so drastically? Right? All of this threads to lack of advocacy and institutional support. As librarians take on all of these jobs, right? Again, nurses, social workers, mental health professionals, we are not told to fix our workplaces, fix the field so that we are feeling more like actual people. Instead, we're told to lean in. We're told to embrace grit and resilience, right? It's called the next library trend of the future. We're putting it in our actual conferences to embrace the fact that instead of creating healthy workspaces, librarians are just doing more and more and more things in order to continue the same amount of services that we say that we're supposed to be providing. And then when people critique, right, now we're at the macro level, right? Before we had Leslie Williams, who was punished for speaking at the micro level, and now we have, right, the Black Caucus of ALA when they denounced the fact that Orlando was going to be the conference center after Trayvon, and with all of the issues with Stand Your Ground, we're told, well, ALA does so much good. Why should we talk about critiques like this? Things are always dangerous. Why should we talk about libraries and people feeling are unsafe, actual librarians feeling unsafe, when in fact that's a political issue and we should only be focusing on libraries? So ultimately, as I said, why does it matter? Vocational awe hurts us all. It creates unhealthy work environments. It creates the idea that advocating for yourself, whether it be negotiating for a higher salary, negotiating for an actual work-life separation, or whatever the case may be, is seen as not as committed, not as in it to win it, right? As do more with less, or whatever the catchphrase of the day is. And it especially hurts women of color and other marginalized groups because, again, these are used to, this vocational awe is just used as a weapon against us should we do critique the profession, right? They say things like, well, maybe you're just not fit for this library, or maybe you're not as committed to the profession. Why is it that you are always the one bringing up the critiques when the other librarians, when our peers aren't doing it? It takes important conversations, and depending on who and what is saying it, relegates it either to the margins where it's dismissed and not talked about, or brought to the very center and deemed important and professional and right. So it seems like, right, all I said was, nothing will change. Everything's negative, right? That is not what I want to do here, right? And that's why I brought this James Baldwin quote, right? Not everything that is changed, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Librarianship and librarians themselves need to start deconstructing vocational awe, need to start dismantling vocational awe. This idea that librarianship is a sacred duty is toxic, and it is the dominant narrative, unfortunately. So until we start to critique that, librarianship cannot change, cannot grow, cannot evolve. And if it cannot evolve, then we cannot actually support both our librarians and our patrons. At the end of the day, libraries are an institution. These are just some of the other institutions we have, right? They also have ideals. The police, their ideal is to protect and serve. The justice system, their ideals is justice for all. And the government, their ideal is we the people, for the people, by the people. And yet, many of us can agree in this room that these institutions need reform. So what makes libraries, which is also an institution, any different? It isn't until we start to actually acknowledge the fact that we are an institution located at a center of institutional oppression and marginalization that we can start to change and hopefully maybe even live up to the ideals that we so boldly and broadly pronounce and espouse. So now I want to do an activity. I want all of the white people in the room to stand up. If you are unable to stand, that's fine. Just those who are able, please stand. Thank you. And I want you to stomp as hard as you can 3 times. Those who are sitting, you may clap instead. You may. Thank you. Now you may sit. And now I want all the women of color and people of color in the room to stand up. And clap and or stomp 3 times. Now, before you sit, look around. I'm sure, and I know for myself, it is not often that we are the dominant narrative in the room. Often at our own institutions, we're the only one, or one of 2, or one of mostly staff, right? If we are librarians, because I won't get into it, but we all know the difference between staff and librarians when it comes to the racial inequity, right? But here, you have a community. Look at all these faces. These are our people. We are out here. We out here, you know, like we can make a difference. You may sit, thank you, right? The margin, right, to bring it back to bell hooks, to bring it back to this conference, the margin is more than a place of deprivation. It is also a site of radical possibility. It is a site of community. It's a site of reimagining and recreating radical spaces. It's a site where we can push forward towards the center, whether we're only one in our institution or we're out here where there are multiple. We are out here and we will continue to push forward. Thank you.